Recording progress.
Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharmasvarupine avatara varisthaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha Vasudeva sutam devam Kansa chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnang Vande Jagatgurum. So in the last class, we were studying the 22nd and 23rd sloka of the second chapter of Shrimad Bhagavad Gita, where we find that the idea that a self is beyond all perception. If anyone asks that if there is self, what is the proof? Can you show it just the way I can point out a flower, a book, a chair, a table? So, well, the subject can never be objectified. The moment you objectify it, it becomes an object, and it will lead to infinite regression. You will just go on, have to think of someone is there who is observing. So the ultimate subject can never be objectified. So that's the idea which we find in Vedanta, stressed again and again. The self is the foundation of the entire creation. It is the fundamental principle. Just the way even in physical science, when we say that something is fundamental, what it means, the thing based on which the other things can be defined, but you cannot define it as such, as it is fundamental. Based on that, I can define the other physical quantities. The ultimate fundamental unit, entity in the entire existence is the self. And that being without parts, just the way any physical entities do have parts, they are material and they're localized. At certain time, at certain place, we find all the things. Starting from the galaxies, stars, planets, to a small creature crawling on the earth. It's all can be specified to be located in particular time, in particular space. Self is non-local. As in the last class, we were giving the example to understand that what's the idea of non-locality is. Just the way the transmission for all our television transmission is going on, the way the internet is working. So all those informations are non-local. And can we in any way annihilate them, destroy them, the way we think of destroying any material object? It cannot be. The self being non-local, being immaterial, being without parts, in no way can be destroyed. It is eternal. It was, it is, it will be. So let us quickly go through the slokas which indicate those ideas. There is not much to discuss on it before we proceed to the next section of the Bhagavad Gita. This 23rd sloka, Nainang Chindanti Shastrani, Nainang Dahati Pavaka, Nachainang Kledayantyapo, Nashoshayati Marutah. Weapons cannot cut it. Nainang Chindanti Shastrani, Nainang Dahati Pavaka. The fire cannot burn it. Nachainang Kledayanti Apa. Apa is water. The water cannot wet it, drench it. Na shoshayati marutah. The wind cannot dry it, suck it. Like just the way the vacuum cleaner sucks everything. The wind as if sucks everything, dries up anything. Shoshayati means to suck. The wind generally sucks. So that's how the things gets dried. So it cannot dry it. And for this, the same reason, what happens? The self cannot be cut or burned. Achhedoyam, the 24th sloka, adahyoyam, akledya, ashoshya evacha. The self cannot be cut or burned or drenched or dried. Nitya sarvagata sthanu achaloyam sanatanaha. So it is something nitya, eternal, sarvagata, all pervading, sthanu, unchanging. Nothing can change it. And achaloyam, immovable. The self is the same forever. So that's the idea which has been spoken of in the 24th sloka. So these are not just abstract ideas. Again and again, we should always remember that each and every sloka has to be reflected in such a way that it do have some implication in our life. If the self, which is the real me, is eternal, all-pervading, unchanging, immovable, it speaks that in our life, whatever, like the anvil of the blacksmith, that's the example which they give in the scripture for the sthanu. That however you may go on hammering over it, there is no change as if for the anvil of the blacksmith. It cannot be deformed. The self is something like that. And if I am that, all the changes in my life is not actually entailing the change in the real me. And that's the implication from these slokas. If I am identified with myself, I also am supposed to be like that sthanu, the anvil of the blacksmith. Whatever may go on, I know it for certain with full conviction that nothing can affect me. And that gives us the grit, the resilience, the strength. It's not the strength of the muscles, it's the strength of the soul on which we have to rely to really go through the course of life. With all the challenges, with all the crises which we face in life, we can face them calmly, with full strength, with equipoise, if we are always aware of that nature of the self, which is unchanging, unmovable, at the same time eternal. It's all pervading. So constantly to assert our real existence by being identified with the self, these are the slokas which should be used as the mantra for contemplation. The slokas are actually mantras. Mantra, the word mantra means mananat trayate iti mantra. When you go on thinking over it, those ideas seeps in. It becomes the be-all and end-all of your existence. Just the way when I eat food, the food is assimilated, the nutrients are passing through my arteries, through the entire body. It is nourishing my body. These ideas in the same way should as if should nourish me, should transform me, should overhaul my personality so that I can also be calm, equipoised, immovable in all situations of life. And that's how this can be used as mantra. Mananat trayate. When you go on cogitating upon it, it trayate, it saves you. It helps to transcend all the so-called dualities of life. So these are the ideas. That's why it's repeated again and again. As we were mentioning, that it's told that Shastreshu na mantranam jamita asti. That there is no fault. The scripture doesn't suffer any redundancy. It becomes redundant, useless, because it is repeating the same thing. No. Many may feel that what's the same idea repeated again and again? It's actually creating a groove in our mind. This constant cogitation of the idea. Otherwise, this idea remains in just something superficial. Only it somehow appeals our intellect in our day-to-day life. When we are facing the struggle, they has as if no implication. That's why these things are repeated again and again, so that we can continue our spiritual journey by doing nididhyasana. Yes, intellectually I'm convinced of the fact that I am the self, but that won't do. You have to now meditate on your intellectual conviction. Go on thinking so that your stimuli response conditioning changes, your reflexes changes. In the life of Sri Ramakrishna, we found that his reflex changed. The so-called material things which lure us, even in unconsciously, those are the things his body will repel. And seeing that, Swami Vivekananda coined a wonderful definition of education. What is education? Education is the nervous association of ideas. That the ideas which I am studying, contemplating, it is just not to that what to do with my spare time. So this idea somehow gives me a very exalted feeling. I read. But if after reading, if after dwelling in those thoughts, I find that in my moments of crisis, moments, the challenges, it in no way is helping me, then all those readings, though is of avail, yes, for the time when you were free, you had nothing to do, it helped you to have a good quality of life. But if it doesn't help us in the moment of dangers and crisis, its work is half done. So that's why it has to be repeated again and again, so that it becomes a part and parcel of your life. It becomes a nervous association. Just nervous association means reflex. It has entered into your nerves. It has changed your reflex system. Otherwise, education remains just, in the words of Ramakrishna, our education at last makes us like vultures. We fly very high, but all our focus is on some carrion, some rotten flesh, down on the man, in some pit hole, some rotten flesh is there. From the sky, my focus is there. It has not in any way overhauled my personality, transformed me. So it shouldn't just be a matter of academic knowledge. It has to be totally internalized. We should seep in those ideas. So that's the thing which is being indicated. The 25th sloka also almost speaks in the same line of Vyaktoyam Achintyoyam Avikaryoyam Uchyate Tasmat Evam Viditvainam Nanu Shochitum Arhasi. Avyakta means unmanifest. Just like all the objects, you cannot say that the self is something which can manifest. It is the cause of manifestation of everything, but it is something which is unmanifest. So that's why it's avyakta, inaccessible to the senses. It's for the senses to perceive anything, and it has to be manifested. So by avyakta means it is inaccessible to the senses. Achintya, incomprehensible, by means it's inaccessible to the mind. So by these two words, what is indicated? The Atman is avang manasu gocharam. Vak speaks of the senses. Mana speaks of the mind. Is a negation. Gochara means to comprehend by the mind and senses. Vak, mana, gochara. Vak actually speaks of all the senses, the karmendriyas as well as the jnanendriyas. Mana speaks of the mind. Gochara means to comprehend, to perceive. Anything which is not perceived by the senses and the mind becomes a. A is in the sense of negation. Vak, manasa, gocharam. Avang, manasa, gocharam. Agocharam. So this Atman is avyakta, is achintya. That means it is avang manasa gocharam. In our spiritual journey, when I'm thinking of the self, who is thinking? It is the mind. When I say I am the Atman, I am the Brahman, who is saying it? It is the mind. That's why very nicely in Ashtavakra Gita, how nicely it has been mentioned that the self can never be thought of. Why? Achintyam chintyamanopi chintya rupam bhajatyaso. Achintyam chintyamanopi chinta rupam bhajatyaso. So when you think of the unthinkable, you are actually resorting to a piece of thought only. You can never think of the thing which is unthinkable. You cannot think. So when you're trying to do that, it is just in the name of thinking that you are having some mental image of it. And that's why it's a very important thing that in the entire world, all the religions, whether they believe in form or formless God, everyone is resorting to image. You have to. It may not be an external image, but as long as we have to think of the self, we have not realized, some way or other, you are forming a mental image. As Swami Vivekananda used to give an example, that Ananta, that God is without end, all pervasive. The moment you have to think of it, immediately what will we do? We will be imagining the sky, the ocean, and the sky, the ocean becomes the image, becomes the idol. The self is not the sky, the self is not the ocean. So somehow or other, we have to resort to some sort of imagery. Whether it is a form of an idol or not, I cannot avoid in any way this idol worship in some form or other. Maybe the idol is not there outside. It has to be in your mind. Because it is achintyam. I cannot think of it. It is beyond the thought. Because of that, thought is possible. Avikarya, unchangeable, being without parts. It cannot change. It is the eternal self. It is always the witness of everything. The witness never changes. When you are dreaming, the experience of dream is contradicted by the experience of the waking state. When you wake up, you know that the dream was false. When you were dreaming, the dream was true. Nothing else existed. So the dream state and the experience of the dream state and the experience of the waking state are contradictory. But then what is true? What is the truth? The truth is the experiencer. The one who was dreaming, he knows it is the me only. Who was dreaming? Who woke up and now I feel what I was dreaming was not true. But can you deny the one who was dreaming is a different person than the one who has woke up? No. So the experiencer is the same. That is the idea of avikarya, avikari. There is no change in the experiencer. And that experiencer, when you try to point out, it is achintya, avyakta. It is there, but you can never point out, because as we were saying, the moment you can point out, it becomes an object. So that's the profound thought process we find thousands of years back the rishis have resorted to, which finds in a wonderful form of bouquet. in Bhagavad Gita. Swami Vivekananda used to give a wonderful example when he was eulogizing the Bhagavad Gita. What he told is very interesting. That throughout the Vedas, throughout the Upanishads, it's like forest. You have entered into the forest, and suddenly you come across, you suddenly see a wonderful flower, beautiful flower. And then you again start walking along all the bush. And after a long, long distance, again you see some beautiful flower or some beautiful scenery or some fruit, whatever it may be. So Gita has collected all those in the form of a bouquet. And all those ideas you find in one place, which made this Bhagavad Gita as the Shruti Prasthana. There are three prasthanas, Shruti, Smriti, and the Nyaya. The Upanishads are the Smriti, Shruti Prasthana. The Upanishads are the Shruti, which were in those days, in the Vedic ages, when the script was not described and was not discovered, but the ideas, these profound ideas were revealed to the sages, to the pure mind of the sages. And to keep the tradition going, they used to verbally transmit that knowledge. So you have to learn that through hearing. That's why they're all Shrutis. And then much later, the Smritis, Smriti Shastra came. There's all those profound ideas when finds expression through the great lives. To remember those lives, you write the life stories, the epics, the itihasas, full of the stories of the saints and seers. He may not be just a renunciate, he may be the king, Rajarshi. But his life was an exemplification of all these truths which has been spoken of in the Vedanta. So these exemplifications has been nicely documented in the Smriti Shastra. So Bhagavad Gita being a part of Mahabharata, where the life of Krishna is being exemplified, that how the one who is speaking, one who is transmitting this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita is himself an example of that type of life. The best commentary of Bhagavad Gita is the life of Sri Krishna. So it is finding expression through that. So that's the thing which we will find is again and again being related through all these slokas. The life exemplified in the life of Krishna is being transmitted to Arjuna. So avikarya, unchangeable, without parts. So it is always the eternal witness. So we find these ideas that, as we told, that it is exemplified through the lives, the Smriti Shastra, like the Bhagavad Gita. And it even follows still even the recent days. This idea of this avikari is wonderfully exemplified in the life of Sri Ramana Maharshi. It's a very wonderful life, highly inspiring. He has a boy of 16 or 17, that's the time. So suddenly one day he felt that I am going to die. No one was at home, he was alone. All others went out for to attend some festival. He was alone, and suddenly the thought of death came, and he thought, I'm going to die. He became frightened. He came home, lay down in his room on the floor, and he just was repeating in his mind, mentally repeating, what? I'm dying, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And imitated the whole experience of death. So it's a very interesting thing. The life of Raman Maharshi, this experience, this singular experience demonstrates a wonderful fact that no one of us can imagine death. Can you imagine your own death? You'll say, yes, I can imagine. What will you be imagining? That your body is lying, your relatives are repenting over the dead body. It's most probably taken in for the funeral. Who is visualizing all this thing? Who is visualizing? The experiencer. Can you ever think of your death? Impossible. You have to think of your death, you being the experiencer. I can never think of my death. And that's the idea. For us, it maybe is just an intellectual idea. But for Ramana Maharshi, in a flash, it brought him that realization. It totally overwhelmed him. His personality was just immediately transformed. And that's the idea on which he spent the entire life. These are the beauty of these wonderful lives. So that's I am the deathless, the one who watched my death is always there. That is my true self. So that's the thing. Means we all are studying the scriptures only that we don't know when such flash of realization will come. All our intellectual cogitation is for that. Unless that flash of realization comes, we are still in the world of darkness. It's all, though we may think that we are spiritually evolved, it is just intellectual evolution. It in no way speaks of spiritual transformation. The spiritual transformation comes, when it comes, it really transforms your life. You become Jivan Mukta. As Sri Ramakrishna used to say, that what spiritual realization is like, he says to give a nice example. Suppose a cave is dark for millions of years. All those, the caves are there where now you go for, the tourists are, it has become the tourist spot. So there's the Jenelong caves in New South Wales. We visited also huge, this limestone, these formations are there. Tourists are going. And the guide very nicely, the very first sentence he will say is that for millions of years, it was dark. No light was there. And it's just some 150 years back, one explorer entered into the cave and focused the torchlight. And he was marveled what all these limestone formations are. But forming there in the dark for millions of years. For the first time, the light fell. And okay, after that, the explorers started venturing more and more, and that has now become the tourist spot. The idea is, that same idea Sri Ramakrishna is saying, that most probably a cave was dark for millions of years. Someone enters and just strikes a matchstick. The next sentence, very simple. This simple words of Ramakrishna sometimes becomes very difficult to understand. We take these simple words, we immediately miss the main point. What he's saying, no, you will find that most of us will read it, but we never realize what he's saying. What he's saying, that after a million years, someone entered, strike the match, immediately the cave was lighted. You will say, what is the extraordinary thing in it? What he's indicating is that it never took another million years. That's at his word, dark for a million years. We have the idea, oh, we have so much of ignorance. We are a bound soul. So much of sadhana is required to get rid of the layers and layers of ignorance. To deny that fact, that realization comes in a flash, Ramakrishna is giving that example. That millions years of ignorance, just in a flash, the moment, just like in the life of Ramana Maharshi, it came that it flashed, all the wells of ignorance fell off once for all, just at that instant. So that speaks of the realization. When it happens, no more doubt, no more again groping in this ignorance. All this has vanished. You find your perspective has totally changed. You then feel that so-called the life was a long dream. I think this waking state itself is a long dream. Our dream state is a dream within the dream. Our waking state itself is a dream. As per the spiritual, our spiritual existence is concerned. If this waking state is a dream, and suddenly you feel you have woke up from the dream, all the things loses its importance. Nothing can affect you. It's just a flow. You are the witness, knowing very well no one can affect that witness. And that's the idea of avikarya, which has been spoken of in the 25th sloka. So thus, by saying this, why all these slokas? Krishna is trying to convince Arjuna that he should not cherish the idea of the self as the slayer or the slain. On that account, he should grieve. Now, after so much of discussion on the nature of the self, Krishna, like an adept teacher, he feels that maybe even after so much of explanation, it's very obvious the doubt is there. Even with all this discussion, you meet a young boy who doesn't believe in soul, he will say all these are bogus. So maybe Arjuna may feel like that. It's all these are bogus. There is no self. Then Krishna, now for the next 3 slokas, will take the standpoint of the atheist. That even as an atheist, you don't believe in soul. Then also, just to grieve for the one who is dead or your own death has no meaning. So that's what Sri Krishna in the next 3 slokas will be relating. So assuming for the sake of argument that the self is not eternal or the self doesn't exist, now Sri Krishna will proceed with his deliberation in the next 3 verses. So what's the 26th verse? Atha chainang nitya jatang nityang va manyase mritam tathapi tvang mahabaho naivam shochitum arhasi. Atha. However, but if you forget about that, this idea of the self, you don't believe in it, okay, let's forget. Atha cha enam nitya jatam. If you feel that the so-called consciousness is an epiphenomenon with a conglomeration of the physical, all the physical conglomerates, this consciousness has evolved. Nitya jatam. Every time, wherever we see the expression of life with the conglomeration of matter, consciousness is evolving. The Charvakas, the atheists, they used to give a nice example that when, in India, the bitter leaf, when they apply lime on the other ingredients, spices, there's something which was colorless immediately turns into that brown color. In Sanskrit, that spice is called khair. In khair, the lime is mixed, the color changes. And Charvakas give the example, that example saying that matters conglomerates, and just the way the color comes out, the consciousness evolves. That's the idea of epiphenomenon. The consciousness is not a phenomenon, it doesn't exist, it appears for the time being. Even now, there are so many deliberations, lectures you will find from the mainstream science, those still try to insist on that idea. And Krishna is quite happy. Okay, you believe in that. Okay, the consciousness is an evolute. It just comes out by the conglomeration of matter. Nityam va manyase mritam. And with the death, that every time that you think the self repeatedly comes into being and dies. That when the body disintegrates, the disease, the death is there. If you believe that, tathapitvam, still, O Mahabaho, O the mighty armed, the great warrior, the Mahabaho, who has a huge biceps, you can say, Mahabaho. Naivam shochitum arhasi. You shouldn't grieve. The simple reason is that there is nothing to worry, for one must be there to worry. If you are not there, the one who is dead, if he is not there, for him the worry is over. Who is worrying about the dead? The one who are living. So that's the idea even now we find prevalent, that when you say there is nothing to worry, it has some different implication. There is nothing. Who is there? There is no one to worry. There is nothing to worry. At present, in our when we are living, we say that there are no such external circumstances which is the reason for my worry. And that's why we generally misunderstand when we say there is nothing to worry after death. Actually, the word means there is that you yourself don't exist. There is nothing to worry means that. So that's the idea which has been spoken of in this sloka. Tathapitvam mahavaho naivam shochitum arhasi. So And then the same idea will be continued, extended in the next sloka. Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityu, dhruvang janma mritasya cha, tasmat apariharyarthe, natvam shochitum arhasi. For to that which is born, death is certain, and to that which is death, birth is certain. It's not that he's speaking of the soul, that it is the same matter which conglomerated to create this self as an epiphenomenon, as the atheist thing. Those matter may disintegrate and again integrate in a different way to create another life. So that such nothing is continuing. So even that's the case. Tasmat apariharyate. Apariharyarthe. Apariharya arthe. Apariharya means that which is inevitable. Arthe, knowing very well that death is inevitable. Why should you worry? If something is inevitable, what's the use in worrying about it? If there is a 50-50 chance that something may happen, something may not happen. That, okay, I am trying to get a promotion in my job. It may happen, it may not happen. Then there is a question of worry. With all the unpredictabilities, things speaks of worry. If anything is predictable, then what's the use of worry? It doesn't make any sense. Just think in a very commonsensical way that if something is evitable, then what's the use of worrying? So that's the idea, is saying that if death is something inevitable, then why should you worry about it? As we find that Swami Vivekananda is mentioning in one of his lectures, the only thing, it's a very common thing, even it doesn't need to quote Swamiji, we also know it, that the only thing which is certain in this life of uncertainties, this life is full of uncertainties. But if anything is certain, and that is death, today or tomorrow, or day after tomorrow, or maybe years after, I don't know when, but it is there waiting for me. So we find that this is the idea, that is the most thing which is going to happen, which we throughout our life try to deny. That we find in the Mahabharata in another story, the story of Yudhishthira, when he went to that pond where his brothers, all the younger brothers went to fetch water. And as the Yakshas question, they didn't bother to answer. They all met the same fate. They all died. The condition was that if you have to fetch water, first you have to answer my question. The Yaksha in the form of a crane was just in the shore of the water. Whenever the other Pandavas came to fetch water, the crane spoke out, wet, before taking water, first you have to answer the questions, my questions. First you have to answer my questions, and then only you can fetch water. So they ignored. And he warned them that if you try to fetch water without answering my questions, you will die. And that's what happened. Yudhishthira, finding that none of them have returned, his brothers went to fetch water, none of them returned. Now at last he went. And he also had to encounter the same Yaksha in the form of the crane. Now Yudhishthira, he complied that, okay, whatever question you have to ask, I will try my best to answer. So there are a number of questions. And one of the question was that what is the most surprising thing in this world? Ascharya. And Yudhishthira's reply was that every moment we find that death is there, inevitable death is there. Death is something visible. But we are living the life in such a way that we are not as if bothered about the death. Swami Vivekananda has his own way of saying it, that the thing which is inevitable, we always try to avoid, ignore it. How? is to give the example of a rabbit. The rabbit is, when it is chased by a predator, at last when it finds that it cannot run away, it cannot escape, what it does, it will try to burrow a hole, dig a hole in the soil, and it somehow manages to hide its face inside the hole. And the moment it hides its face, it cannot see the predator, and now it is at peace. Oh, I have most probably hidden myself well, not knowing that he is visible to the predator. At no moment the predator will come and get hold of the rabbit. So that's the example Swami used to say, that through all our social engagements, we keep ourselves busy, socializing, something, doing this, doing that. What we are trying to do, if you just forget that in all sorts of your social engagement, just it happened for all of us during the COVID. And if you really try to find out that how lonely, that how insecure we feel when we are alone. And that insecurity inevitably comes in the form of the thought of death. And to get rid of that sense of insecurity, we try to immediately go and just be with someone. It's just like the rabbit trying to burrow a hole and hide its face. But the predator is there. It's always there waiting for us. It is, I can try to hide myself, but it is always seeing me. It is always something which is inevitable. If it is the fact of life, what's the use? It doesn't speak that you say you're intelligent. What type of intelligence it is? When death is something inevitable, what is the use in trying to run away from it? As in the Mahabharata, some other stories there, that throughout our life, we are playing a game of chess, with whom the opponent is Mahakala. Time is the opponent. And we all know who is going to win the game. We all know. With all our yogas, with all our diet, with all our awareness of health, those are just, we are just playing the game. Those are the moves we are having. There's our yoga, our diet, our health awareness. All those things are the moves by which I am playing against the one who is my opponent, the Mahakala. And we know very well who is going to win. But still we go on playing. And Mahabharata, this idea is very nice. They say, why we go on playing? Just, we know that who is going to win. Just to play a few more extra moves, nothing else. That's to pay a few more extra moves. So that's why when Swami Vivekananda was delivering a lecture, just he was addressing the newly ordained monks of the Ramakrishna order in his days. They were the first batch of monks. And his address to them was, he asked them, do you know what is sannyasa? So there are so many wonderful definitions of sannyasa, renunciation and all. He never spoke on those lines. Simply, a simple, short phrase he told: love death. Sannyasa means only love. Then the next thing, to clarify, he says, will he be committing suicide? No, love death means not suicide. The same thing. When you know that life is going to be over, why are you so much bothered with your own life? So careworn about it. If it has to go, why not spend it for some noble purpose? Just see how wonderful he is interpreting. It has to go. Why not use it for some noble purpose, for the collective good? So that is the love of death. That the death which is inevitable, that it can really, without thinking of any spiritual identity, that I continue to exist even after death. Even without that idea, we can be moral. We can be altruistic. We can be compassionate. That if life is not going to be there, why to bother about myself so much? There is so much suffering in the world. Why not I reach out? Yes, life is very short. Even for this short moment, If I can make that people happy, that makes me feel happy. Why I'm so much bothered about myself? So it gives a wonderful ethics. That atheism doesn't mean that it is bereft of ethics. Even from that, the way you can take that think over your atheism. Yes, life is not there. Now, with this fact, how I just orient my paradigm, orient my viewpoint, on that ethics can be built up. There can be wonderful ethics. And that's what Bhagavan is saying. That if death is inevitable, why are you so much worried about it? Be an instrument in the hand of divine and just think of the collective goodness and do what you're supposed to do. So jatasya hi dhruvo mrityo dhruvang janma mritasya cha tasmat apariharya arthe natvam shochitu arasi. And the 28th sloka will be a conclusion of this idea that even if the self is not there, we shouldn't worry. Avyaktadini bhutani, vyakta madhyani bharata, avyakta nidhananyeva tatraka paridevana. Avyakta adini bhutani. This all the things which you are seeing, all the living beings crawling in this earth, moving around in this world, they were avyakta before their birth, unmanifest. Avyakta adini bhutani. All the adi means etc. All these bhutas which you are seeing, they were all unmanifest. Vyakta madhyani. Just for some time they are vyakta. They become manifest. Avyakta nidhana anyeva. Even after death, again they become unmanifest. Why to worry about it? Tatraka paridevana. Why give so much weightage to this transitory existence? Forget about it. Think that's why Swami Vivekananda in one sentence is there, that so many lives you have wasted giving so much importance to this little self. At last you find no happiness. You thought you were rich, and then the death came to make you realize you are a pauper. Nothing you can take. Just have to die. We all die like a pauper. With all the wealth we amass, and life after life, we were deluded. We were, because of our short-sightedness, our myopic vision. And he's saying, how many lives we have wasted in this way? Why not just spend a life thinking of this high, sublime, spiritual truth? Sometimes we think just to live a life with the spiritual truth. They are all impractical person, of no use. They have no practical implication. They have no business faculty. Swamiji is saying, like a fool, that's just like the majority, the way they think, have in any way they have gained anything? Nothing. Their life was at last wasted. So why not waste a life with the idea, all the spiritual ideals? You have already wasted. You're not going to miss anything. Maybe this idea is also useless. You will be wasting another more life. What's the harm? Already you have wasted so many lives. Be ready to waste another life. Have that courage. Let me experiment. And you may find that it can be something which is showing you a new way. That's the biggest paradox, that we all want happiness in life. We are chasing after happiness. And like the ships, we just follow the ship which is ahead of us. Whatever it does, if it falls in a hole, we also all fall in a hole. We just fall in a, what is the shallow, this pond or somewhere, the first one falls, everyone falls. That's the way of the ship. And that's what we are doing. And Swamiji is indicating that this is the biggest ignorance, because Maya, that we all want happiness and we are all following the course which cannot give us happiness. And there may be someone who, without any intention, that may go towards the other path and suddenly find happiness. To give just what he says, to give an example, we found that forget about self, that self is not, that death is inevitable. But can you explain this fact that if we saw repeatedly every year that whenever there is a public celebration of Sri Ramakrishna or any other public celebrations we have in our centers in India, which entailed a huge gathering, and prasada was distributed to all. So we needed quite a band of volunteers to really serve the food to all. So we do had volunteers, but we thought, as this is an education institution, we have so many students, why not instill this value of service into them? So we used to insist, we will have a duty list in which the students were insisted that for 1 hour or for 2 hours, it's you, the students, who have to serve. And we always used to find when they see the list and their name, it's not all students' name will be there. We used to just try to find out who is a bit strong, healthy, is not sickly. We used to put those names so that they can endure that hardship. And they are the one who will be grumbling. Oh, at last, it is me who have become the scapegoat. And that's the way they were grumbling. But we were very strict about it. No, it's the thing which you have to do. And every year, the same thing, invariably we found the same thing. Once they start serving, their duty was just for 1 hour. They were not needed. We had sufficient volunteers. Just to instill that the spirit of service, we kept a slot of 1 hour for them. Now, when they start doing it, now when it's the time for the other volunteers to come and take over, they're not willing to go. They want to continue. And not only that, they may have the extremely, as they are not habituated, the next day they will have extremely body pain. But invariably even of that fact, at that moment we find they never feel the stress. They continue. Why? They got the joy out of it. That the thing which you thought is never going to give you joy, gives you happiness. Because they say nowadays, they're saying that our genes are altruistic. Whether self is there or not, let us forget, but we cannot deny the fact that in giving others, a type of joy we experience. In this life, know it for certain, if we have ever experienced joy, it is from giving. We suffer when we cannot give. You go to any poor person, you ask, what's the cause of suffering? He will, in 99.99% cases, you will find he never says, because I cannot eat, I am starving. Very few. They will say, I cannot feed my child. I cannot feed I was in welfare section in Belur Math, where we used to give this pecuniary helps to the so-called extremely poor person. And we used to ask that why you need this money, just a small money. He will come for every morning. And of course, this department was meant for that. If you really find someone is in real dire need, okay, the small pecuniary help for the time being will of course help him. Just give him. And then we can think of developing some skills among them so that they can get some type of work to sustain themselves. That comes later. First, give some help. And we used to ask, why you need? And we were asked to observe that remarks. A wonderful thing. In 99.99% cases, no one says it is for me. It's for my child, for my grandchild, for my wife, for my husband. It is for someone else that they are suffering. They're not bothered that they themselves are hungry. They're bothered because someone else is hungry and he cannot do anything. Know it for certain, there is a joy in giving. All the misery comes when you cannot give. All the misery, all the suffering entails when you cannot give. And when we know this fact, forget about religion, forget about the soul. If this is the fact which I cannot deny, why not? Just thinking of that, live a life, knowing very well that death is inevitable. Let me also enjoy while trying to give joy to others through relating for some higher purpose, for the collective welfare. So that's the idea which will be reiterated even through these slokas, where he's speaking not of the self. He's speaking only of the fact that death is inevitable. Then also we can still live a life which can give us a sense of fulfillment. So that's the idea which we find has been related in these 3 slokas. Now, after that why we doubt the existence of self, because it is so subtle. That's the idea which will be spoken of in the next sloka, the 29th sloka, which we will resort to the study of that again in the next Bhagavad Gita class. So thank you all. Namaskars.